everyone. My name is Trevor Cooley. I am not a public speaker. I'm a writer, which is probably the most, individual activity you can do. I don't really spend a lot of time in front of people, I spend months and months ironing out everything I want to say in my books so that when it's in front of someone's face, they know what I want them to read. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about first just a little bit about myself and talk about the creative writing process and what it's like to get published, how to go about doing it, what kind of the landscape is for publishing, and then we'll have some question and answer session after that. So first of all, my love of reading started when I was in elementary school. I had some great teachers who taught me a lot about enjoying reading. And it started, I had a second grade teacher who would read aloud to us in class. And she had a book that she read a bit of every day, and it was called The Great Brain, and is part of a series actually from a local author out there where I was going to elementary school. And the teacher couldn't get through the story fast enough for me. I wanted to know what was going to happen. So I ended up on my own, kind of looking up the book and reading ahead. And that was probably the first time when I was excited to read something. Went on from there, and in my middle school years, I lived at the library. If I'd get every book I could read. I read everything, from stuff that started for younger readers. I read like the Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew, and then went on to like Roald Dahl and a lot of things like that. And I really developed a love of fantasy and fantasy novels, and kind of started with Lloyd Alexander's Chronicles of Prydain, which is, I don't know, you're probably more familiar with it as the movie The Black Cauldron. The cartoon that Disney made is based on that book, on that series of books. But so it was during that time I started to, and I expanded my reading. I read a lot of science fiction and horror novels and things, and probably the books by Stephen King and Dean Koontz, they had a lot of writers as main characters. And so I would read about these writers, and it just seemed so glamorous to me, because I loved reading so much, and I would become so involved in the idea of what if the stories I had in my mind, what if other people were reading them, how cool that would be if somewhere there was a kid in his room reading. And I used to, it got to the point where it's probably I read a little too much. I'd get in trouble at school. The teachers would take my books away. And at night when I was supposed to be in bed, I'd be under my covers with a flashlight reading instead of going to sleep. Of course, it might have helped in that, back in those days, kids didn't have all the outlets they do today. There wasn't any internet, didn't have a lot of video games, and so it was either play outside or read. And so that's what I spent most of my time doing, was reading. So as far as starting my writing process, and that mainly started in school as well, because we would be given assignments, and writing out a paper was always something that was kind of boring to me, and so I always had to try to make it fun. So all my papers end up being stories. When my teachers would give me a spelling list, they would often want you to write out a sentence with each word in it. And I'd turn that into a story. And so every sentence had a spelling word in it, but it was the next sentence in the story. And it was, yeah, my teachers thought that was pretty fun. At least it was something more entertaining than they usually got. But as I went forward in my schooling, and I've had my mom had an old typewriter, and at first I would kind of dictate to her, and she would try to type it up for me because I was always talking about my stories, and she wanted me to write them down, and had terrible handwriting. I still do. And anyway, then I started to, on my own, type out stories, little short stories and things. I got excited about some books, and I was like writing a sequel to a Stephen King book at one point. Anyway, so a lot of influences that came on my writing, probably just anything that entertained me. I was really into comic books for a while there when I was a teenager, and I played role-playing games with friends, Dungeons and Dragons and stuff. And a lot of the characters I had thought up in my head and the world that I came up with would come out, and they would be my characters as I would play those games. And so in a way, the characters that are in my books now have been with me all my life. Last night, I was looking through some of my old papers. My mom had given me when I got married, she had saved all these papers from high school, and I was looking through some of those things. And I found my old first draft of what ended up being my first book. And it's very different than it is now. But it reminded me a lot of where I had come from and kind of the development of the process. So as I got older and I got married, I used to tell my wife about my ideas for these books all the time. And all I ever really wanted to do was be a writer. And so I talked about it a lot. And finally, one day back in 2001, I think, or 2000, she told me to put up or shut up. She was tired of hearing about it. She said, well, if you're going to do it, then do it. And so I started to write my book. And in the beginning, my idea was I had these fully fleshed out characters in my mind they were all amazing fighters or magic users or what have you. And but what I realized when I started to write was that I needed to start from the beginning. And so I took this character that I had always played as in my games and stuff, and I started, well, what was he like when he was young? And so that's where my book started. And I wrote that first book it took me about 1.5 years to write it. And I worked at a call center. And so I would write in between phone calls at work. I'd email myself back what I had written during the day. And then at night, when I got home, I'd be at my computer. I would pull up that email and add it in there and write what I could and then send the email back to work. And that's how it kind of went for that whole year until I finally finished that book. And I had friends and family read it, and that's when I started I started to try to get my book published. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. But first I want to go over the creative writing process. So a lot of people want to write. A lot of people have ideas for books or what have you. So how do you go about doing it? Well, the first thing I would say is that you need to read. You need to be, just about every author that I've read books about or talked to, that's the first thing that they'll say is that you've got to read. Read everything. Read your genre that excites you, but also read other things. Expand your knowledge. A lot of what reading is, they teach you in school. You learn your grammar, but you'll find out as you read other authors, and you get the people like J.K. Rowling and Stephen King, who are the big $1 million makers, and they don't follow the same rules your teacher told you in high school. So a lot of the stuff that you may have been taught, you kind of need to forget if you want your book to flow well and be good. So read a lot. That's the first thing. Another thing I would suggest is it's hard to start off your creative writing journey as a novelist. If that's the first thing you do, it's so easy to get bogged down. I have friends who have, I don't know, just a whole bunch of books they haven't finished. I have a friend named Michael who has a great imagination. He has so many ideas. He's always telling me about them. And I tell him I don't want to know. When people often tell me, "Oh, I have this great idea for a book. I just need someone to write it for me," or like, "Don't tell me your ideas. I don't want anyone to think I stole your idea." But anyway, he has all these ideas. He starts these novels, and he gets maybe 5 chapters in, and then he runs out of steam and runs out of ideas for where he wants to go. So, I suggest you start out with something maybe smaller. If you're excited about writing and you want to be a novelist, write some short stories, write articles. Any writing helps. And there's so many avenues for it. My daughter is also a burgeoning writer, and she writes a lot of fan fiction, and that's where she's kind of getting her start. It's a good proving ground. It's not always good. If you go to the fan fiction sites or read some of that stuff, a lot of it's really bad, but there's some good stuff there. And there's a lot of writers nowadays who are big stars that started out in there. The lady that wrote the Twilight series started out as a fan fiction writer, and then she, now she's a big money writer with, all those films that came out and everything. But so there's lots of ways, lots of outlets for you to develop your craft. One thing that I did, and I recommend to people, is that you keep a notebook full of your ideas. Now, it doesn't have to be a physical notebook, though that's what I did. Now we have so many things you can have one you keep on your phone or tablet or whatever. But the main thing is you keep a notebook, you write down ideas, and keep it near you so that when you have them, you can jot them down. Because one of the biggest roadblocks to writing a novel is not having it fleshed out, not knowing where you're going, and because it all starts out with an idea. What makes my story unique? But that alone is not enough to write a novel. That's enough to get a start. So what I suggest is when you are ready to write that book, even short stories, this helps as well, is that you write down an outline. So you take your notebook, you've been keeping your ideas and notes in, and then you start an outline. What's the beginning of my book? What's the main thrust of the story? And then what's the ending? Coming up with the ending is very important to do before you even start. Because if you start without that goal in mind, you're going to get stuck somewhere in the middle and not going to know where to go. And so what I do in my writing process is I have a very loose outline. I call it a skeleton outline. And so I basically have, here's the major thrust of the plot, here's the beginning, here's how I want it to end. And then as I start to write, I'll have other ideas, and I'll go and I'll plug them in my outline. It's a file in my computer, and it just kind of grows. And as I get further on in the book, I'll just copy that section of the outline out and paste it into the new chapter as I go, and then I just have those notes in front of me as I'm writing. But the thing that's going to drive your story and really take that idea that you have is the characters. And the characters are so important. In fact, I think they're probably more important than the big idea for your novel. And so in your notebook, you need to write down what makes each character unique. What are their strengths? What are their flaws? They can't all be strengths, or else they're not so fun to read about. You have to have something about that character that's going to be their handicap. What holds them back? What are their motivations? You can write out as much of their history as you want. It gives you something to explore as you talk about the characters. Oftentimes, the characters will change your story as you go. So you might start out with your outline, and then you find out that, no, this would be much better because my character would want to do this. And your story will evolve as you go. And at least that's the way I find it. And that's not the only way to do it. There's other writers I know that are very, very strict to their outlines. They have it all plotted out to the nth degree before they even start. My process is a little bit more fluid than that. I allow the story to change and develop. And, I write fantasy, and so the worlds can be very big, very intricate, and, because I have to basically come up with everything from scratch. And there's some freedom in that, because there's not as much research involved. If I'm creating my own industry, I don't necessarily need to figure out how it's done today. But that's one of the great things about today with the computers and the internet we have, is that you can go and research any subject as you're writing, because you do want to be accurate, because readers will call you out if you're not. So for me, as I was writing, I have to write about horses and carts and saddles and weapons and things like that. Those kind of things I need to be accurate on. If I'm going to write a story where a dwarf forges a sword or something, then I better be accurate, or not every fantasy reader who's really a nerd will find out. It'll take them out of the story, and they'll make sure to tell me about it. So the main thing is that you don't give up. You have that idea. If you have your outline, you know where you're going with the story. Don't let yourself stop. Find time to squeeze it in with your daily schedule, because I worked a full-time job while I was writing these books, and so it can be very difficult. But that's the main thing. If it becomes something that drives you, something you're excited about, you'll find time. It'll become your hobby, and that's how you'll be able to actually get that book finished. And that'll put you ahead of most of the world. Everybody you talk to will say, "Oh yeah, I have this story. I have a book in my mind somewhere," but so few finish them. So that's the main hurdle, is to finish it, get it done. And then you have to go about making it good. So now I'm going to talk about what to do once you've finished your novel. All right, so the first thing you need to do is edit, refine your book. And when I was a kid and I heard about this process, I'd read books by writers talking about writing, and they would often talk about how they would have 7 to 10 drafts of their book. And I always thought that sounded terribly boring. If I've written the story, do I want to go back over it again and again and again? And I found for myself, that's actually kind of relaxing. When you get to the end, you're not having to come up with new things anymore. It's not as difficult as the writing process is, because you're going through and you're trying to find errors in your manuscript. You're trying to find ways to make it better, and there's its own kind of there's a fun kind of aspect to it. And just like you watch any sculptor or painter, when they're finished with their painting, they're always going back, adding little touches, or they're finished their sculpture, they're putting in the little detail work, and that is, or they're polishing it or whatever. And that's the same thing. When your story's finished, you get to go in and every time I found that every time I finished going through a chapter, I felt it was better. It made me feel good. I was improving. And you'll find that too, as you're writing, you'll get better as you go. By the time I finished my 3rd chapter, I was already like, oh, that 1st chapter's not very good. I'm going to have to go back there and fix it and make it better. So, one thing that you need to keep in mind, and because I had this misconception, was that I thought, well, I write it, and then I talk to the publishing company, and their editors will come through and go through it, and then they'll give me notes. Well, publishing companies, they don't want to do that. They want to do as little as possible. They don't want a book that's not finished. They will have an editor go over it, but that's not, unless you're a big star in the writing world, they're not going to start out with having their editor at your beck and call. So you need to, before you can get anybody to look at it, you need to polish it as much as you can. And so one of the best ways to do this is have what's called alpha readers. Those are your friends, your family, the people you know who you can convince to read your book. That's not always easy because there's something intimidating about that to people. I find, if the more people know me, the less likely they are want to read the book because they're like, what if it's bad? What am I going to say to him? And so you'll find that a lot. But if you can get your friends and family to support you and read through it, and be open, don't get offended if they're like, well, this part of the story was boring to me, or this character didn't grab me, or what have you. You need to be able to take those kind of feedback and turn it into something positive. Now, there comes a point through the process, because you might show it to a lot of people and you've refined it, but you also have to trust yourself, because there'll be times when you'll be given feedback and it doesn't necessarily make your book better. It doesn't make your book better. Sometimes feedback can make your book worse. There's a time while I was trying to get my book published that I belonged to the Chattanooga Writers Guild, and I would go in to a meeting once a month and with a whole bunch of other writers that were all trying to get published. So we're all basically on the same playing field. There wasn't anybody there who had succeeded yet. And we all handed each other chapters of our manuscripts every week, and then we'd go home, and during the week we'd read each other's stuff and put notes, and we'd give each other feedback the next time we met. And what I found is it was not helpful hardly at all. I got tons of notes. I went back and I was trying to keep it an open mind and keep everybody's ideas. And then I found, when I came back and looked at my manuscript, it wasn't my book anymore. I'd changed it too much, and it took all the fun out of it. Because every writer has their own little pet things they like and their pet things they don't like. And every writer has their own genre that they favor. And so they may not be the best outlet or best input for you. So I had to actually go back and go about 7 drafts back, find the old files and bring it back to erase some of that editing work I had done. So there can get to a point where you just got to trust yourself and go for it. So I started to submit to publishers, and that can be a difficult process. So before I go into that, really, there's a couple more points I want to make. There's some pitfalls in this point of time in the writing process, and because some ways you can go about developing your work is by hiring a professional. So you can hire a professional editor to go over your book for you, and that can be a legitimate way to improve your work. The difficulty is that there's different levels of professional, and being an editor is not something that you have to have a degree for. It's not something that there's any kind of certification program. Anyone can say, I'm an editor, put up a website, and then start charging money to people for looking at their book. And that can be helpful and not helpful. I've had a professional editor go through my stuff at one point, and they missed tons of things. So that's something to keep in mind, because there's a lot of ways you can waste your money as you're trying to get that book finished and get the book published. In fact, there's a whole cottage industry that's just companies that are trying to get money from prospective writers. Okay? And so there's a lot of things to look out for. And I'll talk about that a little bit more here. So when you're ready to submit your work to publishers, here's some things that you need to keep in mind. Is what There's several ways to be published nowadays. And what you really need to do is do your research. Because there's a lot of legitimate publishers and there's a lot of illegitimate publishers. And if they're legitimate, they'll be publishers that have books in bookstores. They'll have writers who are successful that are already attached to them. But like I say, there's that cottage industry that's out there. And there's a lot of companies that call themselves publishing companies. And all they really want to do is charge you to edit your book, charge you to print your book, charge you to put your book out there on the internet. All right, well, a real publisher doesn't charge for any of those things. That's part of the service they provide for taking a bunch of your money when the book sells. Okay, so if anyone wants to charge you up front, then they're not legit. So that you should know. And there are some editors, like I say, there's editors that are professionals that you can pay to edit your book. But if they're going to publish it for you, they're not going to charge you any money. All right, so keep that in mind. There are a few companies that are publishing, they call themselves publishing houses, and their job, what they really do is just put your book on Amazon for you and do some of those things, and they take some of your commission, but they don't really get your book into bookstores. All right, so you know, you can go that route, and some people find it easier for them not to have to worry about the process of putting their own book online and doing those small things, but they don't really do anything that you can't do yourself. So so when you're doing your research, find out which publishers publish books in your genre. So whatever your book is about, find out who else is getting those types of books into stores. Those are the publishers you want to contact. All right. And then if you can't just call up a publishing company and say, hey, I have a book. They don't want to hear from you. So what you got to do is you go to their website and you have to find out what their submission guidelines are. They'll have specific instructions. If you don't follow them to a T, they won't even look at it. It'll just go immediately into the waste paper basket or the shredder at their facility. There are, you know, I said before that there's millions of writers who never finish a book. Well, there's also hundreds of thousands that have, and they're all trying to get published. So to get into a major publisher is really hard. It's kind of like being a musician and wanting to get a record deal, or being a actor and wanting to become a movie star. It's not so simple as, I've got this thing, I finished it, it's great, I love it, I know people are going to love it here, and then the publisher picks it up and gets excited and says, yes, we'll put this out. Publishing companies have their schedules put together years in advance. They have their selected slate of writers they have already got, and they know that when their books are coming out, they have them contracted to come out, and they have a few openings. They're willing to bring in new writers every year. So they may be like a big company. For the ones I was looking at, Tor is one of the biggest fantasy publishers, right? So they already have their own slate of authors, their own list, and they may only have openings for maybe 2 new authors this year. Well, there's hundreds of people like me who want Tor to look at us. So when you send them your submission, it goes into what's called the slush pile. They get hundreds a week, and they have interns whose job is to sift through them and find what Tor's looking for. And so they may be looking for a specific type of book. They might be looking at their slate of books and say, you know what, we don't really have anything young adult this year. We're looking for the next Harry Potter type book. And so if your book does not fit that exact thing, they just are going to send you a form rejection letter. They're not even going to read it. Or they might, you know, they might be looking for the next teen vampire novel, or they may be wanting a detective mystery novel. You don't know what they're looking for, and so it's difficult to pinpoint exactly where your book's going to go. So you got to pay a lot of attention and do some research on your own. And so landing that big publishing fish is, like I said, it's hard. One of the ways to do it is to get an agent. And in a way, getting an agent is the same process that you go through to get a publisher. You got to go to their website, find out what their interests are, what their genres are that they like. You find out their specific, because each agent will have their own thing. I want you to send me a query letter. A query letter could be something like just, I want one paragraph where you tell me who you are and why I should be listening to you. Another paragraph to tell me, or they might give you 2 paragraphs to tell them about your book. You got to summarize your entire book in 2 paragraphs and sell it to them in that amount of time, and then your contact information. Maybe that might be all they want to hear from you. And if you haven't sold a book yet, then it's difficult, because they're going to look, okay, well, what has this person done? I don't know anything about them, but this idea sounds interesting. So they might send you back a card saying, send me more, send me the first 3 chapters of your book. And you send them the first 3 chapters of your book, then they may send back wanting more. And if you get that far, then you're doing pretty good. It's pretty hard to get to that point. So because those agents are also receiving hundreds of submissions a week from people who want an agent who will then go to the publisher for them, because it's hard to get your foot in the door. And so it's really difficult. In a way, it's kind of like there's a lot of luck involved. It could be, someone could just be having a bad day and not give you a chance. So it's very, very difficult to get into that group. And so when I got to the point where I was submitting to publishers, I did everything I could. I became kind of an expert submitter. And I found out, I read so much about how to do it. I read, blogs by all these famous authors who would give advice, and I followed all their instructions. And, some people say that it may take 50 rejections before you get a yes. Over 10 years after I wrote my first book, I had 80 rejections from editors and publishers, and very few of them with any notes as to why. They don't really they don't say, well, your book's long. I had 2 of them that told me that, your book's too long. And so I had to, and I actually took that advice to heart, and I ended up splitting up that first book which I wrote. I was used to big, huge, thick fantasy novels, and I thought they were all supposed to be like that. But for your very first book, a publisher doesn't want to take a chance, because it's going to cost them more to make that book than a shorter one. So anyway, but you'll get very few notes. Most of it is just, thank you for your submission. It's not meeting what we need at this time. And it's just like a card. So you could spend a lot of money sending out the first 3 chapters of your book to all these places in the mail, and then get back a little postcard back from them. A lot of times they ask you to put in your own self-addressed stamped envelope for them to send your rejection back in. So it can be frustrating, and it was for me. There were times in that period I got so frustrated with it, there's a few years where I didn't do anything with it. I just didn't feel like writing, didn't feel like doing anything, because I was so frustrated with the process. And so I looked into self-publishing, okay? And when I first started this, the market of self-publishing is very different than it is today. So the way self-publishing used to be is that you would find a company that was a vanity press. Okay, a vanity press is a company that will print up your book, and then you pay them to print out however many copies. Then you're stuck with inventory, and you've got to go around and sell those books yourselves. So that means going door to door, going to bookstores, going to conventions, going wherever, but bringing books with you and trying to get people to give you a chance. Very few people go the vanity press route and actually end up getting a publishing contract or success down the road. So when you're looking to find a publisher, if somebody says, yes, pay us $10,000, we'll give you 1,000 books, or what have you, they're not really doing anything for you. And so the downside to self-publishing is that once you have that book printed out, even if you just post it on your website, it's considered to be published. So once that's done, the publishing company, if they ever do want your work, will give you secondary publishing rights, which means that you get paid less per sale of the book. So they see it as the second printing. Okay, so it's a different process. So for years and years, I thought self-publishing is a bad idea for me. I knew it, I'd hand-printed out, not hand-printed, but I printed out copies that I put together by hand that I would give to friends and family and get them to read and stuff. But that's all I had for a long time. And I had friends that started to tell me, well, there's this thing called Amazon, and they have a Kindle. And you can read digital books, and you can buy books for 99 cents. And when authors are putting their books on there, they're getting thousands of buys every month. And I was like, thousands of buys at 99 cents? Well, that's more money than I'm making with it now, right? And so, but at first I brushed that off because I was like, no, it'll be secondary publishing rights if I ever get noticed. And but I looked more into it, and after another round of frustrating rejections, one night in May of 2012, I went on Amazon and I was reading about how you actually upload your book for publishing, and it was so easy that I just kind of did it on a whim. It was like 2 in the morning, and I uploaded my first book. I didn't even have a cover, really. I had a picture, and I thought that Amazon would put like the title and stuff on it, but it was just a picture. It looked terrible, but my book was up and it was available for sale. So I went on. I called my brother, who was an artist, and he was an amateur artist, and I asked him, hey, can you help me put a cover together? And he came up to my house one weekend and sketched out the cover for my first book. And I've since redone it. This is my first book, but I have a different cover artist now. But the first edition had a cover by my brother. And then once I had that on there, I went on Facebook and I just started talking to my friends and my family and said, hey, my book is 99 cents on Amazon Kindle. Get it, and just get it to support me, And so in the beginning, when you go to Amazon, you have your book on Kindle, their reporting system's pretty quick. Like within a couple hours of the purchase, you'll see the sale tick up on their charts. And so in the beginning, I knew every time a sale came through who did it, because they would have told me, yeah, I bought your book. So then I'd go look and I'd see it. And that was exciting. I sold a copy. And and I asked my friends to tell their friends, and since it was only 99 cents, just give it a try, it's not going to hurt you. And so in that first month, I had about 90 sales of my first book. And just about all of them were someone I knew about. So then I started, every once in a while, I'd see a little tick, and I wouldn't know who that person was. And that was kind of exciting. Somebody picked up my book. And so at that point, I already had my second book written, because it had been one huge novel that I split in half. And so I did an editing pass on that. So 2 months after I put out my first book, I put out my second. I knew a bit more what I was doing that time. I had an artist already that I'd asked to make a cover for me, and so I was prepared. And I put out my second book. And then that second book, though, I wasn't going to put it 99 cents anymore. The way it works with Amazon is if it's under $2.99, you get 35% of royalty. If it's between $2.99 and $9.99, they give you 70% royalty, which is much better than a regular publisher would ever give you. So if your book is $3.99 or $4.99, you're going to make 70% of that. So my second book was in there at $3.99 at the time, and I started to see sales come in through, and it was like 5 a day. Then time went by and it was 10 a day. Then it was 20 a day, and these were all strangers. I started to see reviews come up. So I'd been talking to my family and friends, hey, once you've read it, put a review on Amazon. I really need a review. And Amazon is careful. They don't want people messing with their review system. So if someone had your same last name, they won't even put the review up. Or if two people from the same IP address put up a review, they'll delete them both. So you can't really game the system or anything, but if you ask people who've read your book to put up reviews, that's really important, because that's, if you're on Amazon and you're looking for a book to read, you're going to look, well, is it any good? And one way you're going to know is what other people say. So reviews are very important. But once I started to see reviews from strangers, that was a really exciting moment, especially because they were good reviews. And not all reviews are going to be good, but it's exciting. And when I started to get Facebook messages from people in Austria or the UK, I started to see that UK sales start to come in and stuff like that. That was really exciting. And at that point, I had my third book almost finished, so I went ahead and I was excited and had a lot of steam, and so I finished my third book and put it out that same year. And things kind of exploded, and it went really well. My wife was able to quit her day job. I continued on mine until I was in 2013, when I was getting ready to finish my fifth book. I finally called my boss, because at that point I was working at home, but I was still working for the company full-time, taking phone calls. I'd actually moved, and so I was living in Idaho, and the company was in Chattanooga, and so I was a remote operator, but I was still taking phone calls and stuff. So I was able to quit my day job at that point and focus solely on writing. Now, it sounds like it came together fairly easy at that point, but there's a lot involved in it. If you're going to self-publish, there's a market now, but that marketplace still means there's a lot of work to do. So I'll talk a little bit about that and some of the benefits between a major publisher and being self-published. So the reason you would want a major publisher is because the major publisher has all the influence, they have all the money, and right now in the industry, physical copies of books are still about 80% of the books sold. All right, so only about 20% of the industry is ebooks. And if you are self-published, your print books are not going to get into stores. They will be available for stores to buy. So, for instance, if you want to buy my books and you don't know where I am and come get a physical copy from me personally, you need to go and you can order it on Amazon. And as Amazon has a company called CreateSpace, and it is print on demand. So what's great about that for me is that I don't have to keep a lot of stock and inventory of my own books. When you order a book of mine on Amazon, Amazon prints it out and sends it to you. And if you have Amazon Prime, any of those books that are done through their company, the shipping's free, but they still have to pay for the book. So you don't have to worry about inventory anymore, so that's not a downside. But if you go to Barnes & Noble, then they might say, okay, well, I can order that book in, and if you give me a couple of weeks, I'll get it. And then they'll place an order. It'll end up going to CreateSpace. CreateSpace will print it out, send it to Barnes & Noble's warehouse, and it'll get sent down to their store. So it can happen, but you're not going to be on a shelf. So that's what a major publisher can do for you. A major publisher also, if you're doing really well, they'll do your advertising for you. All the bookstores will know in advance that your book's coming. You'll get, nice fancy displays sent about this new author in their store. If there's, if the publishing company's trying to sell some books to Hollywood, well, you're going to have that advantage. And that's another advantage to having an agent, too, is that your agent will try to sell your book to the publishing companies. And they can get in the door where it's hard, where you're in the slush pile. They can be on the short list of people to get a book into the editor's hands. So that's the advantage to an agent. An agent can also negotiate overseas rights, which a lot of major authors will say is where they'll get half of their money from the overseas stuff. So it can be big. Now, as a self-published author, there are some benefits. One of them is that you're your own boss. You decide when the book is finished, and you decide when you're going to put it out. You don't have someone breathing down your neck, except for maybe a bunch of fans who are like, when's that book coming out? But you don't have a boss standing over your shoulder, except maybe your wife. I don't know. Also, you get to keep a larger percentage of your royalties from your book sales. Like I was telling you already, what kind of percentage you'll get from an ebook, and that's from Amazon. There's also other marketplaces. There's Kobo, which is more of a Canadian distributor bookstore, but they're also ebooks. There's the Nook, which is Barnes & Noble's brand, which is not as I don't know, they don't sell as many copies. And there's also iTunes has their iBooks. You can also sell books through that, through Google, Google Plus. And there's online publishing platforms where you can upload your book and they will send it to all those sites for you. But Amazon's the big fish. Amazon is the one place that will actually do any advertising for you. So if you put your book on Amazon and people start to read it and you start to get some reviews, then if people are reading another book, you might come up as a recommendation after they're done with their book, where you say, if you like that book, try this. They might send out an email blast saying, here's a new book by this author, give it a try. None of the others do that. iTunes, Barnes & Noble, all those people find you because they're looking for you, or they're looking for that genre and somehow run across your book in their long list of books available. So that's one great thing about Amazon. Amazon also has a lot of benefits if you're exclusive to them. So my books are exclusive to Amazon because I found that I'd sell 100 books on Amazon for every book I sold anywhere else. And so if you're exclusive to them, then you can be part of their program, which is called Kindle Unlimited. Kindle Unlimited is kind of like Netflix for books. And basically people pay a flat fee every month and they get to read all the books they want. So people who are avid readers who read a ton on their Kindles, they become part of that program. They might pay, I think it's $10 or $12 a month. And then I have readers that tell me, hey, I saw your books on Amazon Unlimited last week and I read them all. I'm like, that's 12 books. You read 12 books in 1 week. You know how long it took me to write those? Are you sure you didn't miss something? You want to go back and read it again? But the way you're paid in that program is by the page count. So Amazon keeps track of where you are in your book as you're reading on your Kindle device, which is kind of useful because if you're reading on your Kindle and then you're off somewhere, you just have your phone, you pull up your Kindle app, it knows where you were left off in the book and you can keep reading from there, stuff like that. Well, they also use that to keep track of how many pages in that book you've read. If you're in Kindle Unlimited, the author gets paid per page that you read. So if your book is 500 pages long and they're currently payouts like a half a penny a page, then a 500-page book, they're going to make $2.50 because you read it on Kindle Unlimited. So in some ways, most months, half of my income is Kindle Unlimited. And then there's also audiobooks. Before, as a self-published author, you weren't going to have an audiobook. Now, Amazon, smart, knowing that there's money to be made, has a company called ACX where you can put your book up for auditions. And so narrators who are looking for work, who are looking to get some money by doing audiobooks, will submit auditions to you, and you put up a section of your book you want read, and you start to get auditions come in, and you listen to them. You can tell them what kind of voice you're looking for. You know, I want someone with an American accent, or I want a female or a male narrator, you know, that kind of thing. You can also listen to samples, and if you listen to a narrator you like, you can send them a message and say, hey, will you audition for my book? And oftentimes they will. And so then you can make a deal with that narrator. And they can be what's called a royalty share, where you kind of split the royalties with the narrator 50-50, and that way you don't have to pay them up front. And that can be good for you in some ways because your narrator now becomes a partner with you. And so they're trying to sell your book as much as you are because that's how they're going to make money. Or you can pay them by the finished hour. Some of them are $100 to finish an hour. Some of them are $200 a finished hour. So if your book's 10 hours long, narrated, then you might have to pay $1,000 or $2,000 or whatever up front. And then you get to keep all the royalties. So I'm going to open this up to question and answers here in just a second. So just to kind of finish up, I have currently 12 books that I finished on Amazon. Most of them are part of that first series from those characters I grew up with called The Bowl of Souls. And then I have a new series that I just started last year called Noose Jumpers, which is kind of a fantasy western. Kind of the idea of if there were the gods of the American West and there was a competition as the old Indian gods kind of died off and moved away for new people to take the place in the pantheon, and they are enlisting young outlaws to try to help them build their fame. So that's my new book's about. The main point I want to get through, and it may have sounded kind of difficult there to get into being a published author, and it can be difficult. There's kind of a glut in the self-published world of NaNoWriMo books. I don't know if you guys know what NaNoWriMo is. It's National November Writing Month, where you try to write a novel in 1 month, and a lot of people write a lot of bad novels and then put them up. And so people are always looking for that diamond in the rough. As people who are really addicted to independent writers on Kindle Unlimited, they will be really excited if they come across something that's good. And so you'll be able to build yourself. But it's going to be up to you. If you're self-published, you're going to have to do all the promotion yourself. There's lots of good ways and bad ways to do it, but you know, it can be done. And anyway, that's mostly what I had to say. So I'll open this up now to questions. Yes.
Could you please go over the copyright process versus a domain name? Do you operate under a domain name, or do you have to copyright everything you do?
Right. Well, copyright process is actually pretty easy. You just put on your book copyright your name. You know, in the beginning. There's not you don't have to submit it to any government agency. There's no oversight as far as that goes. If you write it and you declare that this is my work, then nobody can borrow it, or else you can sue them and you'll win. Okay, so.
Title,
huh?
including the title.
Yeah.
Copyright the title.
Yeah, I mean, titles are a little bit harder because there might be 100 books out there have the same title as yours. But you can copyright. Just like you can't copyright a single word, your word could be called, like my newest book's going to be called Behemoth. I can't copyright the word Behemoth as my property. I can copyright the story as my property. But so you can't necessarily copyright the title, but you can copyright the cover image. You can copyright your work. And what was the second part of that?
Domain names.
Domain names. You do need to, if you're going to have a website, which I recommend you do, then you need to buy your domain name. So you can go to GoDaddy. There's a couple places that you can do it through, but you buy it for a certain period of time, and you've got to keep track and make sure that that you still own it, or else somebody else can take it. So my website's trevorhcooley.com. I also bought the rights to bolosouls.com, but then I decided it was just going to be trevorhcooley.com. I don't necessarily care if somebody wants to use that. It'll probably just sell more books for me if somebody uses my book title as their domain name. So, so yeah, you need to buy it and have your rights to your domain name. Any other questions? Yes.
You had said that you had used Facebook to get out to your friends and family.
Yes.
Would you recommend making your own Facebook page?
Yes.
For your
Yes. So you'll have your personal Facebook. That's just for your friends and family. But if you want to put a public face out there, then yeah, you have a Facebook page. It doesn't cost anything. The tools are really readily available when you're on Facebook. You can create a Facebook page. When I first started out, my Facebook page was the name of my first book, which was Eye of the Moonrat. And then I changed, the name of the page is now Trevor H Cooley, but the URL still says facebook.com/Eye of the Moonrat. But if someone looks up my name on Facebook, that's the first thing that comes up is my Facebook page. And I have and if somebody likes your page, they become one of your followers, and when you send out emails, or not emails, but Facebook messages on your page with updates or whatever, then it won't always come up. Facebook's kind of weird like that. They have this algorithm that if people start to like and share, they show it to more people. And so sometimes that's its own, Facebook pages is kind of their own topic. Yes?
Other than, you had said you put it on Amazon for the 99 cents, which I think is brilliant, because it gets somebody to go, oh, it's only 99 cents, I can try it for that.
Right.
And then they like it, and Facebook, which is a wonderful tool. Do you have anything else that you suggest for promotion that isn't going to be cost prohibitive? Like, I know you traveled to the Fantasy Con or whatever that it was recently. Are things like that worth it? Or going to libraries and doing, libraries and bookstores and doing book signings, is that worth what you put into it?
It can be, depending on where you are in your process. If nobody knows who you are at all, then those are going to be some of your best avenues. Going to libraries, going to book signs, giving speeches at Parks and Rec activity. Things like that will get your name out there to people who don't know who you are, for sure. It's not a big money maker. I've made enough at a convention to pay for the cost of going to the convention. But hopefully the people that I talked to there that bought my book or even just picked up a bookmark will like it and want to read more. And that 99-cent book, I'm only making 35 cents for anybody who buys Eye of the Moonrat on Amazon at 99 cents. However, my hope is that I wrote it good enough. The characters sell themselves. The readers like it, and they want to find out what happens next, and so they'll buy book 2. And so far, that's worked for me. I have 225 reviews of Eye of the Moonrat on Amazon. Have a 4.5-star average out of 5. So I've been pretty lucky that way. If your book is good, people will leave good reviews. If it's not, then they either won't review at all or they'll leave reviews you'd rather they didn't. But that doesn't mean everybody's going to like it. But you got to average those out. Any other questions? Yes.
For illustrators, and how do you get pictures for your covers for your books?
Okay, well, in the beginning I struggled with that. I had like I said, I had my brother do it, and he made my first book cover in colored pencil. He's a really good artist, and it looked pretty good. And this is basically still the similar idea with the Moonrats on the cover. But I did notice, even though my book was selling at the time, after my third book came out, I did get a couple notes from people saying, I almost didn't pick it up because of the cover. It looked amateurish, or it looked like it was drawn in crayon, somebody had said. I didn't agree with that remark, but I did start to listen to that, and I thought, well, I can see why people would say it's not as professional. So I started to look up online, and I was making enough money from the books that time that I could afford to pay somebody to do me a cover. And so I found this lady who had advertised on a site for authors called the Kindle Boards, and they had put up a post saying that they're available and had some of their artwork, and I thought, wow, that looks good. She's a really good artist. So I contacted her, and it ends up she lives in India. And I'd never met her. I still haven't. And I basically I sent her the chapter that I wanted the cover to come from, sent her the original artwork, and I said, you know, I just want it to look good, and I want these moon rats to look scary, and I want it to be spooky or whatever. Even though, you know, my books aren't horror books, but, you know, but that's kind of the moment from the story, is that was kind of a challenging spot for my protagonist. So anyway, when I talked to her, she sent me some samples, we sent stuff back and forth. I paid her half the money up front, and but she's really great to work with. Anytime I wanted an alteration done, I had her make the moon rats have damage to their ears and stuff. So it looks like they're in a lot of fights with each other, and they're drooling and stuff like that. And I had her kept sending revisions, and she would come back with it. She was great. In fact, since then, she's done all my covers. So except for the Western cover, which my brother helped me with again, and he's gotten more into digital manipulation artwork and stuff, so he's pretty good. But yeah, definitely the cover is very important, and I didn't mention that really so much in my overview here, but there's a lot of bad books out there, and you can usually tell a book by its cover in that sense. If you look online and there's a book that has a terrible cover, unless it has a whole bunch of good reviews, it's probably going to be pretty terrible. And so that's very important. Yes?
On that line, what's the ballpark cost for a cover?
My first couple covers that I had done, I paid the person who did my second book, I paid her $200. Ended up, I found out she's kind of flaky, but at least I got my cover out of her. But she never sent me the finished artwork, so that made me mad. But when I tried to contact her for the third book, she's like, I don't have a computer anymore, and I was like, maybe she's on drugs. I don't know what's wrong with this lady. But anyway, the new cover artist that I have, it's because she does the front and back covers and also does the audiobook covers for me. It's about $700 for her to do a cover. But they aren't all that expensive. And there's sites that you can go to where artists have uploaded just finished covers already that just don't have a title or whatever. And you can contact them and they may even say, this is for $50, this cover is available. And you might say, well, that would fit my book. Or look through it and say, that would fit my book with a slight alteration. You can contact the artist, and then they change it. So there's avenues for it. And if you email me or contact me, I can send you a link to one of those sites. I've had some of them contact me before saying, hey, I got some covers if you want to use them, but I already had my person I use. Yeah.
In terms of formatting for Kindle, what
Yes.
do you do? What do you use to format?
Well, you can upload directly from a Word document. There can be a couple formatting errors that can come up. And when I very first put up my first book, there was some issues with formatting, and that was difficult in the beginning because I had, I told you when I was writing, I would be at work and I would type, and then I'd email it back to myself, and then I'd send stuff. So I had OpenOffice at work, because my work was too cheap to put up the money for Word. So we all used the free OpenOffice software. And then I had Word at home. And so, they format things a little differently. So when I'd start to get some feedback from some readers, and they'd be like, why is this whole page underlined? I'm like, what do you mean? And then I look on the program, sure enough, it's all underlined. For some reason, I didn't underline it. But in the formatting process of fitting all those two programs together, It was messy. So you do need to go over it. But yeah, you change it to an HTML file, and you can upload it to them. I use a program called Mobi Pocket, which converts an HTML file to a Kindle content file, and then it's just really simple. Like I go to Amazon.
Has a file too that you can.
Yeah, there's a lot of different processes, and other writers use different things. I found what worked for me, and I kind of stick with it because I know it works. I don't want to mess with it because I might screw up. And so, but it's also a little different for the hard copy. So, CreateSpace, which is the Amazon company. There's another company. I can't remember their name off the top of my head. No, well, anyway, there's another company out there too who will do print on demand. I use Amazon's just because they're already linked with Kindle, and it's just so easy. Within a couple days, both books are linked together on their site, and people can pick the Kindle version or the print edition. But anyway, you do have to format it differently for paperback than for the Kindle. Yes, do you have another question?
Okay, if you go through a regular publisher, not self-published, do you still get to choose your cover? Do you still have to pay someone separately, or did they?
No, you have to. You still have to do a lot of your own promotion. In that the publishing company will give you what they will, but it might not be enough. So just because you got a publisher doesn't instantly mean you've won the lottery. I mean, I thought that I'd put out a book and then I'd be set. You know, when I was a kid, I was like, man, this author's famous. Their books everywhere. I bet they're making lots of money. But no, you have to keep writing. But for the covers, no. The publishing companies will do what they will. You have no input. So that.
You can't pick your cover to your book?
Not if you use a traditional publishing company. They have their own cadre of artists that they use. They might ask. You might be able to suggest something to them, but every writer I've ever seen interviewed or talked to that does have a major publisher behind them, they don't have that autonomy to pick their cover. That just gets done. That's why you see so many generic covers out there, is because the authors don't really have input. Yes. Either one, ma'am. You want to go first, and then.
Okay. Do you only publish through Amazon, or do you have a publishing company?
In the beginning, I had it published in Amazon and Kobo and iTunes. I used a company called Smashwords that kind of puts the book on all those platforms for you, but the formatting for each of those companies is different, and they require a lot, especially iTunes. They're very, very anal about it. It's a pain to format it. They want like the spacing a certain way. They want the font to be a certain way, and if it's not, they'll kick it back to you, and you have to go in and change it. You might have to reformat your entire novel, which can take you, a whole day of sitting at your desk, going through each paragraph and changing something. It's a pain. There are some companies that make that easier. There's one in particular, and I haven't used them because I went exclusive to Amazon. But because Amazon, you can't be part of Kindle Unlimited unless you are exclusive to Amazon. So the one downside to that, they're the biggest marketplace, but the downside is if somebody is low, I'm just a Nook reader, well, they can't get your book unless they get the hard copy. But actually, it's not that hard either, because even if you're not on iTunes, somebody who has an iPhone can use the Kindle app. It's a free app. They use the Kindle app. They go to Amazon, buy your book, and then they just open up on their iPad and read it. It's in their Kindle app. So whether somebody has a Nook or whatever, they can just download the Kindle app for it and still read your book. So.
Books at like Barnes & Noble.
It won't be on the shelf. You would have to actually go to the front desk and talk to a lady and say, hey, I'm looking for a book by Trevor H Cooley, and they'd be able to look it up in their database and say, okay, I can get it for you. Or you can go to Amazon, order it yourself, probably pay the same price, and then if you have Amazon Prime, then you get free shipping.
Can you
Yes.
send your publish your work to other publishing companies?
Yes.
Just one at a time, or do you?
You can. I could still be submitting to publishers today. I got so burnt out doing it 80 times that I haven't really done it. And actually, a lot of the new writers that are published right now started on Amazon, and then a publishing company saw how successful they were and called them. And so that's what I was kind of hoping for. I'm like, let them come to me now. I tried going to them enough. But if I wanted to, I could go to them now and I could say, hey, I've sold 200,000 copies on Amazon. You know, I'm looking for a major publisher to take over the digital side of, not the digital side, but the print side of things, because, you know, in the big overall scheme of things, I'm basically not well known. Even though I've sold 200,000 copies, that doesn't, you know, there's millions and millions of people out there that are readers that don't know who I am. And so a publishing company would still be helpful. Yeah, we'll go back to you.
Have you tried anything non-fiction? What sells better, fiction, non-fiction?
Well, I, you know, read it all. But what was your question?
I mean, have you tried anything non-fiction?
I have not written anything nonfiction just because it didn't interest me. Like I mean, there's some. When I was doing my Western, I had to do a lot of research in the Old West, and there's a lot of good books that have been and could still be written about the subject. But I wanted to write about some cool characters using magic in the Old West, so I kind of did my own thing. But I haven't tried it. But there's a big marketplace for it. There's readers that only read nonfiction that aren't really interested in a novel.
Does Amazon have any reservation or hesitation against the new authors? Or?
Amazon has no hesitation at all. They'll put anybody up.
Yeah, anybody can do that.
Anybody can do it. They won't promote everybody. You have to kind of, on your own, still show that your book can sell. So when you first put your book up, you don't just sit back and wait for money to come in. You've still got to talk to people and say, hey, will you give my book a chance? Read it. Like my first book's still 99 cents on Kindle. It's kind of like it's my lost leader. You know, it's the one that I know isn't going to make money, but every time a new book comes out, people see it on the charts. My first book gets more sales because people are like, well, this book's doing pretty well. Let's start at the beginning, and then they want to learn more. But Amazon, yeah, you put anything up there you want, but you do still have, you yourself are still in charge of promotion. If you're lucky, Amazon will start telling people about it. If you start having success, Amazon wants to make more money, so they're going to tell people, hey, this book is a good book to read. Are there any other questions? Yes.
When you're buying, you don't have to tell me the answer.
Right, yeah.
You don't want to. But when you're buying those books to resell,
Yes.
do you have to buy them at the same cost we do, or can you
No.
get it cheaper to resell them?
If I buy them from Amazon, I do. So if I go on Amazon, it's going to cost me the same as it costs you, whether it's a Kindle copy or a physical copy. But if I go to CreateSpace, which is the company that prints the books, I get just a little bit over. I don't know what their cost is. They're still making good money on me. But I do get a discount. I sell them for usually about $5 more than they cost me to buy. So. Like I sell my physical copies on Amazon, they're usually around $15. In person, I usually sell them to people for about $12, and they cost me like $7 or $8 usually to get print. Yes.
I went through, I'm writing children's short stories.
Mm-hmm.
I went through Archway, and they, of course, got me on Amazon,
Mm-hmm.
Kobo, and 2 or 3 others.
Yes.
So I'm just beginning. So
Right.
But that's where I went.
Yeah, I haven't heard of Archway, but they may be one of those smaller publishing companies who kind of take care of that business for you. And I know a lady is a great person, a friend of mine, who goes by the author pen name of Honor Raconteur, who has a little company of her own called Raconteur House. And that's basically what she does is if an author wants to get going, she's had experience. She's published like 15 books of her own. So they can talk to her and she will upload it on Amazon for them and do that stuff, put it as part of her her imprint. I'm not sure what she charges for that, but that is available. Yes.
Professional editors,
Mm-hmm.
any idea in terms of ballparks of cost and even how you go about, I mean, like you said, I mean, you can find anybody that'll do anything for.
Right. Well,
How do you even?
the one professional editor I used was working for one of those vanity press companies, and on her own time she was doing other editing on the side, and my wife happened to friend her online and did a trade for her for I think she knitted her something, and in exchange she read my book for me. But they can charge. I've heard people say, people charging up to $200, depending on how long your book is. Some of them may charge more. As far as whether it's a good bang for your buck, that's a good question, because it could cost as much as getting a good cover to get a professional editor, and they may not particularly like your genre, but they might just be looking for errors. They might not give you any good advice. So it's kind of hard to determine, who's going to be good. But if you don't have a good base of people around you to read your book for you and be alpha or beta readers, then then that is a way to go, and some people recommend it.